a new world order through the fusion or the consolidation of business and religion and politics. What we've heard Tom Littleton also talking about, the three-legged stool: government, corporations, and religion. You can say it that way, or you can say it the way she did: business, religion, and politics, the same thing. And we know that this is what's going to happen because Revelation 18 speaks about these merchants. You can go right through the Bible, go through Revelation 18, and you keep seeing in Revelation 18 representation of government, of corporations, business, merchants, and then you see spirituality. We see spirituality mentioned in Revelation 18, 23 to 24. It speaks of, for your merchants were great men of the earth. By your sorcery, all the nations were deceived. And of course, we know it speaks often about the governments. Revelation 17 and 18 speaks about nations and kings. Today we call them prime ministers or presidents. So there is in Revelation 17 and 18 that three-legged stool: government, corporations, and religion or spirituality. Revelation 18:3, for all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. This is a spiritual fornication. The kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich through the abundance of her luxury. So again, we're seeing the merchants, we're seeing the spiritual fornication, the religious aspects, the merchants, the kings, and the spiritual, that three-legged stool. And this is exactly what Alice Bailey's demon told her would happen. Well, of course, the demons know the Bible as well. Revelation 18 in the New American Standard, in the New King James, we see the word merchant used 4 times. We see kings used twice, nations used twice, sorcery used once. So again, that is highly represented in the new order of what's coming, and that's exactly the new order occultist Alice Bailey was talking about, this consolidation of power. Well, talk about government and spirituality. In 2009, Pope Benedict issued a 30,000-word encyclical where he called for, quote, reform of the United Nations so there could be true world political authority. In his June 2009 encyclical, Pope Benedict also called for a global tax. He called for global redistribution of wealth from rich countries to poor countries. He called for a worldwide redistribution of energy resources so that countries lacking those resources can have access to them as well. What was he really pushing, folks? Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, as it's called today. Sustainable development. That's all he was pushing. Globalism. And this is not new. The Vatican has worked with the United Nations. A pope back in the 60s took his tiara to the UN and left it there at the United Nations. Some leaders have for a long time regarded there being 2 popes in the world, one at the Vatican and one at the United Nations. So the head of the United Nations. So they believe in this marriage between the UN and the Vatican. And we see now today, sadly, a marriage between globalism and evangelical leaders. So by no means am I picking on Catholics. In fact, many Catholics today believe the last few popes have been apostate popes. There are open, very vocal Catholic groups that are very opposed to the last 2 popes for the very same reasons we'd be opposed to them when it comes to their promotion of Marxism or globalism. Well, the Vatican, in a paper in October 2011, they put out an 18-page report that called for, quote, global public authority, end quote, and a, quote, world central bank, quote, and a, quote, supranational authority, end quote, with, quote, universal jurisdiction, end quote. And the 18-page document was released by the Vatican, contained the often used communication or the communitarian phrase, common good, 22 times. I literally went through and counted common good used 22 times. Maybe you heard Tom Littleton use that phrase, common good. As I discussed in my book, Marxianity, common good is another way for saying communitarianism or social justice. Communitarianism, if you remember, is simply the merging of socialism with capitalism. The late Henry Lamb died a few years ago. He was one of our columnists. He was one of the first guys lifting up a clarion call against globalism, against Agenda 21, against sustainable development. And Henry Lamb used to call the communitarianism represented through Agenda 21 communism light. And that's really what we're seeing promoted today, communism light. I don't think we're going to go to outright communism. Even what China has today, as Trevor Loudon was talking, is not a really outright communism, is it? They have businesses over there. Much of it obviously is government controlled and government funded, but it's not pure communism. And so I think what we're going to see is a global mixture of communitarianism or communism light or big government mixed with big business for what I referred to yesterday as corporate fascism.
The worst is yet to come.